Alrighty, this is me sitting in my recording room without night vision. As you can see, my hand waving in front of the camera. There's two bats fighting in a cave. There's a black cat slinking across the table. All that stuff, just to prove right. There's my watch. Nice and dark. Another round of load shedding. It is 6 o'clock at the moment. We've got 2 to 2.5 hours from this. So, we're going to end this video or recording and hop over to night vision. And we're back. Yes, night vision makes all the difference. So, a couple of things I kind of messed up last time, or spoke weirdly of, because this is all unscripted. I'm using the night vision so that the words stick out a lot better than if you're using a normal camera. So black and white, high contrast, all of that stuff. I'm reading the phone screen, not the book. I can't even see the book. Which means that my eyes get tired quite quickly doing this method. Also, my voice might sound a bit rough because this is at the end of a work day, so I've done a full day's recording. Now we have some load shedding and we're doing some more recording, just to keep things going. So that's why when I pause and I move the book around and it loses focus, I stop reading because I can't see anything. What else? Hope you enjoy. Yep, next story in this book. We're still waiting for the Deathworlder novel to come through. That should be coming through sometime next week, hopefully. It is also quite hot in this room, so I might sound a little out of breath, and it's not because I'm out of breath, it's because I'm hot. Probably 30 degrees in here. No, it's very stifling with no fans or anything, but no electricity, no fans. Can't think of anything else. So we are going to go to the... also, the pages are coming out of this book, which happens in old books when the glue fails. So, good. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. I just want to make sure that we can get both sides of the page. And then we can zoom in a bit more. There we go. That's nice. Move it over slightly. Whoops. Camera's doing all sorts of weird things. Okay. I'm just positioning the camera without dropping it on myself so that I can see the words without the buttons of the phone getting in the way. We're just going to have to zoom out just a touch. There we go. Now, the short stories are broken into two sections, really. The first section is the author talking about the story and what surrounded the story. And then the second part is the actual story. So, I don't know whether you guys want me to read the preamble to the short stories or just read the short stories. Excuse me 1 second. There we go. Also, you'll hear people walking about, coughing and all of that stuff because, well, this is recorded on a phone, not with a computer. So, the joys of doing it live. All right, tonight's story. Captain Honario, Harpplayer, RN. Captain Honario, Harpplayer, is pacing in a tiny quarterdeck of the HMS Redundant, hands clasped behind his back, teeth clamped in impotent fury. Ahead of him, the battered French fleet limped towards port, torn sails flapping in the spars, trailing over in the water, splintered hulls agape where his broadsides had gone thundering through their fragile wooden sides. "Send 2 hands forward, if you please, Mr. Shrub," he said, "and have them throw water on the mainsail. Wet sails will add 1/8 of a knot to our speed, and we may overtake these cowardly frogs yet." But, sir," the stolid first mate Shrub stammered, quailing before the thought of disagreeing with the beloved captain. "If we take any more hands off the pumps, we'll sink." will hold in 13 places below the waterline and—
Damn your eyes, sir! I issued an order, not a request for a debate. Do as you were told.
Aye, sir, Shrub mumbled, humbled, knuckling a tear from the moist spaniel eye. Water splashed out onto the sails, and the redundant instantly sank lower in the water. Harpplayer clasped his hands behind his back and hated himself for this display of unwarranted temper towards a faithful Shrub. Yet he had to keep up this pose of strict discipline before the crew. The sweeping and dregs of 1,000 waterfronts, just as he had to wear a girdle to keep up his own front and truss to keep up his hernia. He had to keep up a good front because he was a captain of the ship, the smallest ship in the blockading fleet that lay like a strangling noose around Europe, locking in the mad tyrant Napoleon, whose dreams of conquest could never extend to England, whilst these tiny wooden ships stood in the way. Oops, some pages are rushing away.
Give us a prayer, Captain, that to speed us on our way to even become we're sinking,
a voice called from the crowd of seamen and the pumps.
I'll have that man's name, Mr. Dogleg.
Harpplayer called to the midshipman, a mere child of 7 or 8, who commanded the detail.
No rum for him for a week.
Aye, sir, piped up Dogleg, who was just learning to talk. The ship was sinking. The fact was inescapable. Rats were running on deck, ignoring the cursing, stamping sailors, and hurling themselves into the sea, ahead of the French fleet, and reached to the safety of the shore batteries on Cape Putefex. Pate-Fear. And the gaping mouths of the guns were turned towards the redundant, ready to spout fire and death when the fragile ship came within range.
Be ready to drop sail, Mr. Shrub,
Harpplayer said, then raised his voice so all the crew could hear.
Those cowardly Frenchies have run away and cheated us £1,000,000 in prize money.
A growl went up from the crew who, next to the love for rum, loved the pounds, shillings, and pence with which they could buy the rum. The growl was suddenly cut off in a muffled howl of pain, and the mainmast, weakened by the badly aimed French cannon, fell onto the mass of labouring men.
No need to drop the shell, Mr. Shrub. The slaves of our friend Boney have done it for us,
Harpplayer said, forcing himself to make one of his rare jests so loved by the crew. He hated himself for the falseness of his feelings, ingratiating himself onto the sympathies of the illiterate men by much such means. But it was his duty to keep the torch ship. Besides, if he didn't make any jokes, the men would hate him for the slave-driving, cold-blooded, chance-taking master that he was. They still hated him, of course, but they laughed while they did it. They were laughing now as they cut away the tangle of rigging and dragging out the bodies that lay them in neat rows upon the deck. The ship sank lower in the water.
"Avast that body dragging," he ordered, "and man the pumps, or we'll have dinner on the bottom of the sea."
The men laughed a ragged laugh again and hurried to their tasks. They were easy to please, and Harpplayer envied them their simple lives. Even with the heavy work, bad water, and the occasional touch of the cat, their existence was better than his tortured life on the lonely pinnacle of command. The decisions were all his to make, and to a man of his morbid and paranoid nature, this made life a living hell. His officers, who all hated him, were incompetents. Even Shrub, faithful, long-suffering Shrub, had his weakness, namely the fact that he had an IQ of about 60, which combined with his low birth, meant that he could never rise above the rank of rear admiral. While he considered the varied events of the day, Harpplayer began his compulsive pacing on the tiny quarterdeck, and its other occupants huddled against the starboard side where they wouldn't be in his way. 4 paces in one direction, then 3.5 paces back, with his knee bringing up the shuddering crack against the port carronade. Yet Harpplayer did not feel this. His card player's brain was whirling with thoughts, evaluating and weighing plans, rejecting those that held a modicum of sanity, and only considering those that sounded too insane to be practical. No wonder he was called Sapsucker Harpy throughout this fleet, and held in awe as a man who could always pull victory from the jaws of defeat, and always at the imminent cost of life. But that was war. You gave your commands and good men died, and that was what the press gangs on shore were for. It had been a long and trying day, yet he still would not permit himself to relax. Tension and the agony of apprehension had seized him in a relentless grip that Cerberus ever seen since soon after dawn of the morning, when the lookout had announced the discovery of sails on the horizon. There had been only 10 of them, Frenchy ships of the line, and before the morning fog had cleared, the vengeful form of the redundant had been upon them, like a wolf amongst the sheep. Broadside after broadside had roared out from the precisely serviced English guns, 10 balls for every one that popped out of the French cannon, manned by cowardly sweepings of the 8th and 9th classes of 1812. Grey-bearded patriarchs and diapered infants who only wished that they were back in the familial vineyards, instead of here, fighting for the tyrant, facing up to the wrath of the death-dealing cannon of their island enemy. The tiny country left to fight alone against the might of an entire continent. It had been a relentless, stern chase, and only the succour of the French port had prevented the destruction of the entire squadron. As it was, 4 of them lay among the conger eels at the bottom of the ocean, and the remaining 6 would need a complete refitting before they were fit to leave port and once more dare to retribute might of the ships that rang their shores. Harpplayer knew what he had to do. "If you please, Mr. Shrub, have the hose rigged. I feel it is time for a bath." The ragged cheer broke from the boiling sailors, since they knew what to expect. In the coldest northern waters, or in the dead of winter, Harpplayer insisted on this routine of the bath. The hoses were quickly attached to the labouring pumps, and soon the columns of icy water were jetting across the deck. "In we go!" shouted Harpplayer. Hold on. Stupid phone. There we go. Sending me a message. "In we go!" shouted Harpplayer, and stepped back, well out of the way of any chance droplets, and at the same time scratching with a long index finger at the skin on his side, unwashed since the previous summer. He smiled at the childish antics of Shrub and the other officers prancing nude in the water, and only signaled for the pumps to cease their work when all of the white skins had turned a nice cerulean. There was a rumble not unlike distant thunder, yet sharper and louder from the northern horizon. Harpplayer turned and for a long instant saw a streak of fire painted against the dark clouds before it died from the sky, leaving only an after-image in his eyes. He shook his head to clear it, and blinked rapidly a few times. For an instant, there he could have sworn that the streak of light had come down instead of going up. But that was manifestly impossible. Too many late nights playing... Phone. Pay attention, phone. Too many late nights playing Boston with his officers. No wonder his eyesight was going. "What was that, Captain?" Lieutenant Shrub asked, his words scarcely audible through the chattering of his teeth. "A signal rocket, or perhaps one of those newfangled Congreve war rockets. There's trouble over there, and we're going to find out just what it is. Send the hands to the braces, if you please. Fill the mains topsail, and lay her on the starboard deck. Tack. Can I put my pants on first?
No impertinence, sir, or I'll have you in irons.
Shrub bellowed the orders through the speaking trumpet, and all hands laughed at his shaking naked legs. Yet, in a few seconds, the well-trained crew, who not 6 days before had been wenching and drinking ashore on Civvy Street, never dreaming that the wide-sweeping press gangs would round them up and send them to sea, leapt to the braces, hurling the broken spars and cordage overside, sealed the shots holes, buried the dead, drank their grog, and still had enough energy left over for a few of their number to do a gay hornpipe. The ship heeled as the turned water creamed under her brows, and then she was on a new tack, reaching out from the shore, investigating the new occurrence, making her presence felt as the representative of the mightiest blockading fleet in the world at that time had ever known. "A ship ahead, sir," the masthead looked out, called. 2 points off our starboard bow.
"Beat to quarters,"
Hornplayer offered. Through the heavy roll of the drum and the slap of the sailors' bare, horny feet on the deck, the voice of the lookout could be barely heard.
"No sails, no spars, sir. She's about the size of our longboat. Belay that last order, and when the lookout comes off duty, I want him to recite 500 times, 'A boat is something that is picked up and put on a ship.'"
The pressed on by the freshing land breeze, and the redundant closed rapidly on the boat until it could be made out clearly from the deck. "No masts, no spars, no sails. What makes it move?" Lieutenant Shrub asked with a gape-mouthed puzzlement.
"There is no point in speculation in advance, Mr. Shrub. This craft may be French or a neutral, so I'll take no chances. Let us have the cannonballs loaded and run out. And I want the marines of the foretook shrouds, with their pieces on the half-cock, if you please. I want no one to fire until they receive my command, and I'll have anyone who does boiled in oil and served for breakfast."
"You are the cart, sir."
"Am I? Remember the coxswain who had his orders mixed up yesterday?"
"Very gamey, sir, if I do say so," Shrub said, picking a bit of gristle from between his teeth. "I'll issue the orders, sir." The strange craft was like nothing Harpplayer had ever seen before. It advanced without visible motive power, and he thought of hidden powers of underwater oars, but they would have been midgets to fit in the boat. It was decked all over, and appeared to be covered with glass hutment of some kind, all in a strange device, and certainly not French. The unwilling slaves of the occupants in Paris would never master the precise techniques to construct a diadem of the sea such as this. No, this was from some alien land, perhaps from beyond China or the mysterious islands to the east. There was a man seated in the craft, and he touched the lever that rolled back to the top window. He stood then and waved to them. A concerted grip ran through the watchers, for every eye in the ship was fastened to the strange occurrences.
"What is this, Mr. Shrub?" Harpplayer shouted. "Are we at a fun fair or a Christmas pantomime?" "Are we at a fun fair or a Christmas pantomime? Discipline, sir!"
"But, sir," the faithful Shrub stammered, suddenly at a loss for words. "That man, sir, he's green."
"I want none of your damn nonsense, sir!"
Harpplayer snapped irritably, annoyed as he always was when people babbled about their imagined colours, paintings and sunsets and such tripe. Nonsense. The world was made up of a healthy shades of grey, and that was that. Some fool of a Harley Street quack had once mentioned an imaginary malady which he termed colour blindness, but had desisted with his tomfoolery when Harpplayer had mentioned the choice of seconds.
"Green, pink, or purple, I don't care what shade of grey this fellow is. Throw him a line and have him up here where he can hear his story." The line was dropped, and after securing it to a ring on the boat, the stranger touched a lever and closed the glass cabin once more, then climbed easily to the deck above.
"Green fur,"
Shrub said, then clamped his mouth shut under Harpplayer's fierce gaze. "Enough of that, Mr. Shrub. He's a foreigner, and we'll treat him with respect, at least until we find out what class he is from. He is a bit hairy, I admit, but certain races in the north of the Nepalese Isles are that way. For addressing the man. Perhaps he comes from there. I bid you welcome, sir," he said, addressing the man. "I am Captain Honario, Harpplayer, commander of His Majesty's ship Redundant."
"Where are the Captain?"
"Not French," Harpplayer muttered, "nor Latin nor Greek, I warrant. Perhaps one of those barbaric Baltic tongues. I'll try him on German. Ich reckon. I apologize for this. Can't even see that. Mischmann, or Italian dialect. I'm not even going to attempt that." The stranger responded by springing up and down excitedly, then pointing at the sun, making circular motions around his head, pointing to the clouds, making falling motions with his hands, and shrilly shouting, "Makoo, Makoo!" "Fellas bar me," the marine officer said, "and besides, he got too many fingers." "I can count to 7 without your help," Shrub told him angrily. "I think he's trying to tell us it's going to rain." "He may be a meteorologist in his own land," Harpplayer said safely, "but here he's just another alien." The officers nodded in agreement, and this motion seemed to excite the stranger, for he sprang forward shouting his unintelligible gibberish. The alert marine guard caught him on the back of the head with the butt of the Tower musket, and the hairy man fell to the deck. "Trying to attack you, Captain," the marine officer said. "Shall we keel-haul him, sir?" "No, poor chap is a long way from home. May be worried. We must allow for the language barrier. Just seed him in the Articles of War and impressed him into service. We're short on hands after the last encounter." "You are very forgiving of nature, sir, and an example for us all. What shall we do with the ship?" "I'll examine it. There may be some principal operation here that would be of interest to Whitehall. Drop a ladder. I'll have a look myself." After some fumbling, Harpplayer found the lever that moved the glass cabin, and when it slid inside, he dropped into the cockpit and that it covered. A comfortable divan faced the board covered with a strange collection of handles, buttons, and drivers' machines concealed beneath the crystal covers. It was a perfect example of the decadence of the East. Excessive decoration and ornamentation, where a panel of good English oak would have done as well, and a simple private bar to carry the instructions to the slaves would be rowed the boat. Or perhaps there was an animal concealed behind the panel. He heard a deep roar when he touched a certain lever. This evidently signaled the galley slave or animal to begin his labors, since the little craft was now rushing through the water at a good pace. Spray was slapping into the cockpit, so Harpplayer closed the covers, which was a good thing. Another button must have tilted the concealed rudder, because the boat suddenly plunged into the nose and sank, the water rising up until it watched over the glass. Luckily, the craft was stoutly made and did not leak, and another button caused the boat to surface again. It was in that instant that Harpplayer had an idea. He sat in one paralyzed, while his rapid thoughts ran through the possibilities. Yes, it might work. It would work. Ha! He smacked his fist into the open palm, and only then realized that the tiny craft had turned while he had been tinkering, and was about to ram into the Redundant, whose rail was lynched with a frightened fly's face. With a skillful touch, he signaled the animal, or slave, to stop, and there was only the slightest hump as the vessel touched. "Mr. Shrub," he called. "Sir?" "I want a hammer, 6 nails, 6 kegs of gunpowder each, with 2-minute fuse and a looped rope attached, and a dark lantern." "But, sir, what for?" For once the startled shrub forgot himself enough to question his captain. The plan had so cheered Harpplayer that he took no umbrage to the sudden familiarity. In fact, he even smiled into his cuff, the expression hidden by the fading light. "Why, 6 barrels because there are 6 ships," he said with an unaccustomed coyness. "Now, carry on." The gunner and his mates quickly completed their task, and the barrels were lowered in a sling. They completely filled the tiny cockpit, barely leaving room for Harpplayer to sit. In fact, there was no room for the hammer, and he had to hold it between his teeth. "Mrs. Plum," he said indistinctly around the hammer. Suddenly, depressed as he realized that in a few moments he would be pitting his own frail body against the hordes of the usurper who cracked the whip over the continent of oppressed slaves. He quailed at his temerity of thus facing the tyrant of Europe, then quailed before his own disgust at his frailty. The men must never know that he had these thoughts, that he was the weakest of them. "Mr. Shrub," he called again, and there was no sound of his feelings in his voice. "If I do not return by dawn, you are in command of the ship, and will make full report. Goodbye, in triplicate, mind."
"No, sir,"
Shrub began, but his words were cut off as the glass cupboard sprang shut, and the tiny craft hurled itself against the power of the continent. "Come on, focus." Afterwards, Harpplayer was to laugh at his first weakness. Truly, the escapade was as simple as strolling down Fleet Street on a Sunday morning. The foreign ship sank beneath the surface and slipped past the batteries on Cape Petrifix. The English sailors called Cape Petrifix, and the slight roiling of the waves of the bay, and no human eye saw the dim shape of the surface next to the high wooden wall that was the hull of the French ship of the line. 2 sharp blows of the hammer recurred the first keg of gunpowder, and secured the first peg of gunpowder, and a brief flash of light came from the dark lantern as the fuse was lit. Before the puzzled sentries on the deck above could reach out the rail, the mysterious visitor was gone, and they could not see the telltale fuse in puttering away, concealed by the barrel of death that it crept slowly towards. 5 times, Harpplayer repeated this simple yet deadly activity, and as he was driving the last until there was a muffled explosion from the first ship. Hutment closed, and he made his way from the harbour to behind him 6 ships, the pride of the tyrant navy, burnt in pillars of flame, until all that was left was the charred hulls settling on the ocean floor. Captain Harpplayer opened the glass Hutment when he was past the shore batteries, and looked back with satisfaction at the burning ships. He had done his duty, and his small part towards ending this awful war that had devastated the continent and world. In the course of the few years, killed so many of the finest Frenchmen that the height of the entire French race would be reduced to an average of more than 5 inches. The last pyre died down, and, feeding on the twinge of regret since they had been fine ships, though in fife of the madmen on Paris, he turned the bow of his craft towards the redundant. It was down when he was reached the ship. Sorry. It was dawn when he reached the ship. The exhaustion tugged at him. He grabbed a ladder lowered for him and painfully climbed to the deck. The drums whirred, and the side boy saluted. His bosun's pipes trilled.
"Well done, sir. Oh, well done,"
Shrub exclaimed, rushing forward to take his hand.
"We could see them burning from here."
Behind them in the water, there was a deep burbling like the water running from the tub when the plug was pulled, and Harpplayer turned just in time to see the strange craft sinking into the sea and vanishing from sight. "Damn silly of me," he muttered. "Forgot to close the hatch. Running quiet, I see. Must have washed in." His ruminations were sharply cut through by the sudden scream. He turned just in time to see the hairy stranger run to the rail and stare, horrified, at the vanishing craft. Then the man, obviously bereaved, screamed horribly and tore great handfuls of hair from his head, a relatively easy task since he had so much. Then, before anyone could think to stop him, he had mounted the rail and plunged headfirst into the sea. He sank like a rock and either could not swim or did not want to. He seemed strangely attached to his craft, since he did not return to the surface. "Poor chap," Harpplayer said, with the compassion of a sensitive man. "To be alone, and so far from home. Perhaps he is happier dead."
"Aye, perhaps,"
said stolid Shrub, muttered.
"but he had the makings of a good topman in him, sir. Could run right out into the spars, he could. Held on very well, he did. What with those long toenails of his that had bit right into the wood. Had another toe in his heel that helped him hold on."
"I'll ask you not to discuss the deformations of the dead. We'll list him in the report to the lost overboard. What was his name?"
"Wouldn't tell us, sir, but we carry him in the books as Mr. Green."
"Fair enough. Though foreign-born, he would be proud to know that he died bearing a good English name."
The curtly dismissing the faithful and stupid Shrub, Harpplayer resumed walking to the quarterdeck, filled with the silent agony which was his alone, and would be until the guns of the Caution Ogre were spiked forever. End of story. Bit of a weird one, but interesting enough. Hope you enjoyed. If you did, do the YouTube stuff. No more playing in the dark for me. I'm gonna go find something to do for the next 2 hours. Yay, no power. Woo! Anyways, hope you all have a good one. Cheers.